ललिता श्री विशाखान्वितांश्च श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर शिवासदि गौरभक्तवृन्द श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर शिवासदि गौरभक्तवृन्द कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर शिवासदि गौरभक्तवृन्द हरे कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण
Hare Krishna, Nitai Prabhu ji, Dandat Pranams.
Hare Krishna Prabhu ji, Dhanavad. Yes.
Can you enable your video, Prabhu ji, so that I can highlight?
Yes.
Making co-host. Just Hare Krishna, dear devotees, Dandat Pranams to all. We welcome all of you for the today's morning program, Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya. And today we are very fortunate to have His Grace Nitai Prabhu, and Prabhu will enlighten us on Srimad Bhagavatam, 4th Canto, 28th chapter, verses 54 and 55. Over to you, Prabhu ji. Hare Krishna.
Okay. Hare Krishna, everyone. So I'll just say the pranam prayers and then we will start. Okay. Om Ajnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Namam Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pristhaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Tinamine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschat Deshatarine Pancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Bhayevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So Hare Krishna, dear devotees, it's my great fortune and pleasure to be in your association this morning, and I sincerely seek your blessings and good wishes as I attempt to explain verses 54 and 55 of the fourth canto, chapter 28. Purañjana becomes a woman in the next life. So I'll start with text 54. Ham sav aham cha tvam charya sakhyo manasayo no abhutam antara vakha sahasrara parivatsaran. Translation. My dear gentle friend, both you and I are exactly like two swans. We live together in the same heart, which is just like the Manasa lake. Although we have been living together for many thousands of years, we are still far away from our original home. Purport. The original home of the living entity and the Supreme Personality of Godhead is the spiritual world. In the spiritual world, both the Lord and the living entities live together very peacefully. Since the living entity remains engaged in the service of the Lord, they both share a blissful life in the spiritual world. However, when the living entity wants to enjoy himself, he falls down into the material world. Even while he is in that position, the Lord remains with him as the super soul, his intimate friend. Because of his forgetfulness, the living entity does not know that the Supreme Lord is accompanying him as the super soul. In this way, the living entity remains conditioned in each and every millennium. Although the Lord follows him as a friend, the living entity, because of his material existence, does not recognize him. So in this verse and in this purport, here we are being reminded, right, that how the Supreme Lord is a very intimate friend, and he lives with us. He accompanies us even within, the different forms that we take on, different forms of bodies that we take on. He is always with us. And he says that although we have been living together for many thousands of years, we are still far away from our original home. So in the previous purports, this point has been very, it has been explained in great detail how the Lord, our intimate friend, the super soul, accompanies us in different forms. But because of our attraction to the material energy and material pleasures, we forget that the Lord is accompanying us, and we forget that our original home is not this material world, but the spiritual world. So the reasons for this forgetfulness, again, have been explained in the previous verse, how due to the desire to lord over material nature and to enjoy separately from the Lord, right? Ichha dvesha samutena dvanda mohena bharata sarva bhutani sammoham sarge yanti parantapa. So Krishna tells Arjuna in 7.27 that how we become entangled in this material world and become forgetful of our relationship with the Supreme Lord. Why? Because we are overcome by the dualities of desire and hate. So desire to be the enjoyer and the controller. Aham Ishvara, Aham Bhogi. So due to this desire, and then when this desire develops, then we are envious of the Supreme Lord as being the Ishvara Sarva Bhutanam. So even though Krishna is the Ishvara Sarva Bhutanam, and he is situated in everyone's heart, Hriddeshu Arjuna Tishtati. So he is situated within everyone's heart, but because of our desire to be the controller and to be the enjoyer, we become not only forgetful, we also become envious of the position of the Supreme Lord. And it's explained, Prabhupada writes, this is an explanation how the living entity falls down into the material world. So this purport that Prabhupada has written to text 54 is actually a shorter version of the purport he gave to the previous verse, text 53. So I will not get into more details into this because this has already been discussed in great detail yesterday. And Prabhupada is summarizing in the purport many of the main points that he made in his previous purport. So the main thing that we have to remember from here is that that even while, as Prabhupada writes, even while he is in that position, the Lord remains with him as a super soul, his intimate friend. So even though we become forgetful of the Lord and we are trying to enjoy separately from the Lord in different forms and different bodies that we get, still the Lord, due to his compassionate nature, he is always with us as our intimate friend, and he's waiting for us to turn to him, so that he can help us and guide us to get out of this material entanglement that we are in. So, and Prabhupada concludes this, he says, although the Lord follows him as a friend, the living entity, because of forgetful material existence, does not recognize him. So now we'll go to the next verse, text 55. Satvam vihaya mam bandho gato gramya matir mahim vicharan padam adrakshahi kayachin nirmitam striya. Translation. My dear friend, you are now my very same friend. Since you left me, you have become more and more materialistic, and not seeing me, you have been traveling in different forms throughout this material world, which was created by some woman. Purport. When the living entity falls down, he goes into the material world, which was created by the external energy of the Lord. The external energy is described herein as some woman or Prakriti. This material world is composed of material elements, ingredients supplied by the Mahatattva, the total material energy. The material world created by his external energy becomes the so-called home of the conditioned soul. Within this material world, the conditioned soul accepts different apartments or different bodily forms and then travels about. Sometimes he travels in the higher planetary systems and sometimes in the lower planetary systems. Sometimes he travels in higher species of life and sometimes in lower species. He has been wandering within this material universe since time immemorial. As explained by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Brahmanda Brahmite Kono Bhagyavan Jeev Guru Krishna Prasade Pai Bhakti Lata Beej. The living entity wanders into many species of life, but he is fortunate when he again meets his friend, either in person or through his representative. Actually, it is Krishna who personally advises all living entities to return home back to Godhead. Sometimes Krishna sends his representative who, delivering Krishna's very message, canvasses all living entities to return home back to Godhead. Unfortunately, the living entity is so greatly attached to material enjoyment that he does not take the instructions of Krishna or his representative very seriously. This material tendency is mentioned in this verse as Gramya Mati, sense gratification. This word Mahim means within this material world. All the living entities within this material world are sensually inclined. Consequently, they become entangled in different types of bodies and suffer the pangs of material existence. So here we are reminded further, right, and deeper that the Lord, He's us, He's saying that, my dear friend, you are now my very same friend. Since you left me, you have become more and more materialistic, and not seeing me, you're traveling throughout different forms throughout this material world, which is created by some woman or Prakriti. So this is what happens when we become forgetful of our relationship of the Supreme Lord. What is the result? That we become more and more materialistic, which means that we try in many, many different ways to satisfy our material desires, which are contrary to our relationship with the Supreme Lord. Right? So the more and more we try to be happy in this world and to enjoy separately from the Lord and in a controlling mentality, what happens is that all these actions that we partake in, they make us more and more forgetful of our relationship with the Supreme Lord. So there's a beautiful verse that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu tells Sanatan Goswami in his teachings to him. He says that since time immemorial, right, that the living entity has become forgetful. He says, Krishna bhulya se jeev anadi bahir mukha atava maya tare dai samsara dukkha. So forgetting Krishna, the living entity has been attracted by the external feature from time immemorial, anadi bahir mukha. So we've been attracted to this external feature of Krishna's energy, right, from time immemorial. And what do we get in return? So therefore, Maya gives us Atava Maya Tare Dai. Right? So what do we get? We get more and more miseries. Samsara Dukkha. And Prabhupada concludes this purport. He says, all living entities in this material world are sensually inclined. Consequently, they become entangled in different types of bodies and suffer the pangs of material existence. So the more and more forgetful we become, and we take the shelter of the material energy, and we try to enjoy in this world, the more and more we get entangled in different types of miseries of material existence. And we see that, in the material world, in the next verse, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu explains, Kabhu, swargi uthaye, kabhu narke dubai. So this is the nature of Maya. Right? What happens? Sometimes we are, we get a very powerful position, right? We may even go to the heavenly planets. Kabhu swarge uthaye. So we go to the heavenly planets. We enjoy, much superior sensual pleasures than we can experience in this material world. But again, we can't stay there. Right? So even that comes to an end. And then sometimes we are Naraki Dubai, we go to the hellish planets and we suffer incessantly. And this is the nature. And we can experience this even in this world. Right? That sometimes, things go very well for us. And we have a lot of resources. We have lots of money. We have lots of influence. We have lots of power. And we use that in different ways to enjoy in this material world. And the modern world, everyone is spending so much time and effort to come with so many different options for temporary sense gratification. I remember when I lived in the US for 10 years, I was just amazed, that how many different options of material enjoyment are made available in, in a country like America. So many options, so many, different types of entertainments and theme parks and resorts and, things to eat, restaurants and parks and, clubs and nightclubs, different types of sports, so many different types of options, so that, we become more and more entangled. We go from one option to another option to another option, and our whole life just goes from one option to another, and we still not cannot satisfy the soul. And we see in India now, that we think that, okay, we're really progressing. We've got now better standards of, material enjoyment. We've got, so many restaurants that were not there. We've got so many shopping malls. We've got so many movie theaters, upgraded movie theaters. So many things that we are doing, discovering so many different options, different types of technology, different types of, innovative products. And this is the nature. This is the nature of the material world, and especially the modern world. Keep innovating, new things, latest versions of things, whether it's a phone or whether it's, refrigerator, it's a washing machine, whether it's a home, so much effort is being made to come up with so many different options of material enjoyment. But Krishna says that because these things are temporary, ultimately they are illusory. He says right in the beginning of the Bhagavad Gita, in his instructions in 2.16, he says that what is real, right? He says, na sate vidyate bhavo, na bhavo vidyate sataha. So he says that which is real, which is sat, right? There cannot be any change. And that which is illusory cannot be permanent, right? And so we experience in this world that no matter whatever level of material enjoyment it is, it does not last, right? It gives us some pleasure for some time, and again we are back to our dissatisfied condition, and again then we have to try and seek another type of pleasure. And all these material arrangements that we try and do in this world ultimately frustrate us, and none of them give us any permanent solutions. And this will be described later in the next chapter, how material solutions are just like shifting the weight. Suppose someone is carrying some heavy load on their head, right? Just like in India, sometimes you see, the dhobi, carrying a big heap of clothes on their head, right? And then when the burden gets too much on the head, they shift it to their shoulder, right? and then shift it to the other shoulder. And sometimes, they put their hands forward and carry. So basically, the load still remains. It's not that we are relieved of the load, and but we try to keep shifting the load so that we can feel a little bit of relief, from that burden. But that burden still remains. So this is the nature of material solutions, and that they never relieve us of that load, and they never give us any permanent pleasure, and they don't give us any permanent life, right? So the more and more we become forgetful of our relationship with God, we stay entangled in this samsara chakra. So one life after another life, one form after another form, so many different endeavors, to enjoy in different forms, but no respite, right? More and more entanglement in material life. So as devotees, we are trying to understand this more deeply. We are trying to understand with the help of the scriptures, with the help of our spiritual master, and with our Siksha gurus, and with the help of other devotees. We are trying to understand and trying to develop the realization that ultimately this material world is not our home. And no matter how hard we try in this world to become happy, it is not possible. And Krishna keeps reminding us in the Bhagavad Gita, in the 8th chapter and the 9th chapter, he tells us that this world is dukkhalayam ashashvatam. And again, he says, similar, the same thing in different words. He says, it is anityam asukham lokam. Just after one chapter, he repeats again, that this material world is not our place of, it's not our real home. This is meant for, meant for temporary things, and it is meant ultimately for giving misery to the eternal soul, because by its nature, it is temporary, and anything temporary cannot ultimately satisfy the soul. And we see our acharyas, they remind us through their songs, through their teachings, of the nature of this material world. We see in the Shikshastakam, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he says that, how this material world, it is like an ocean, it's a vast ocean of poison, it's like a forest fire, in Samsara Dava, we sing every morning in the Guru Vastakam, Samsara Dava Navalita Loka. So it is like a forest fire, right? It is an ocean, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu says. It is, a huge, vast ocean of poison. And then Narottam Das Thakur sings, he says, Porechi Bhava Tufane. This is like a hurricane. And what is it that makes us forget this, that we are in such deep trouble in this material world? It is, Prabhupada explained in that purport towards the end. He says that this material tendency is mentioned in this verse as gramya mati, sense gratification. So this sense gratification, Prabhupada uses this word, very frequently throughout his purports. And it is another translation of the word kama. And Krishna says the same thing in the Bhagavad Gita, that this kama is, this tendency to satisfy our senses. It is the eternal enemy of the soul. he says, Avritam Gyanam Itena Gyanino Nitya Vairina. So this karma, right? It is the eternal enemy of the soul. Why? Because it covers our real knowledge, right? It covers the knowledge that we are this eternal soul, right? Who has the same nature as the Supreme Lord, like explained in this verse, that they're like two swans. They're of the same nature. And Krishna explains this in the Bhagavad Gita, that the living entity, it's mame vamsa jiva loke. So it is, the living entity is the same eternal nature as the Supreme Lord, right? But because we are forgetful, we've been covered over by this enjoying tendency, karma, right? That we become completely forgetful because it covers the knowledge of the Supreme, of the eternal soul, and makes the soul, get entangled in the meshes of material existence. That's why Krishna says that right in the beginning, try to curb this symbol, this sinful tendency, karma, because this is what captivates us in this material world. And this is illustrated very graphically, right? In the Mahabharata, there's a very beautiful explanation how, the living being, right, is hanging from a tree, right? And actually hanging from a branch. I just want to show you if I can just find this. But I had that there's a beautiful let me see if I can show you this. 1 second. Yes. Just fun. I'll just share my screen. So many of you may have, seen this before, but this is a very beautiful graphical illustration of our condition in this material world. And it's a very stark reminder of our position, and what is keeping us here, right? We are in such a precarious position. We're hanging from this very fragile branch. Not only is the branch fragile, we have two little rats who are gnawing away, who are, biting away at this branch. And these two rats, they represent time, day and night, right? So by the passing of every day and the passing of every night, right, we are getting closer to what is explained. We have the, snakes down there waiting for us. All our reactions of our fruitive activities, our karma, they're waiting for us at the bottom in the form of the snakes, right? And, the elephant, our karma, right, is, which is chasing us also in the form of death, right, is shaking the tree, right? And we're still trying to hold on, and we're trying to hold on. Our dear friend, the Supreme Lord, right? He's calling, he's there to help us, right? But we are ignoring that call. We become forgetful that the Lord is right there. And we're hanging, and what is keeping us hanging there? There is honey dripping from the honeycomb above, right? So a little bit of honey that is falling on our face, and we are trying to lick that honey, right? And feeling a little relief, a little pleasure. Right? And this is our eternal enemy. This Prabhupada tells us that in the purport he writes that, that in the material world there is so-called feeling of happiness, right? And this so-called feeling of happiness is the eternal enemy of the soul. So we do, like this person, is depicting our condition in this material world. We are in such a precarious situation, but just a little feeling of material pleasures, they make us forgetful of our precarious nature of the material world. And the more and more we analyze through the scripture and through, the association of devotees, we realize how we actually begin to realize how dangerous our position is. Right now in this picture, we just focused on licking the honey, right? But when we gain awareness, right, when we gain knowledge, then we see around what is happening, right? We see the elephants shaking the tree. We see below, the snakes are waiting for us. We see time, taking away, our existence in this material world, right? And we also realize that, that there is God. God is there. If we turn to God, there is so much help that we get to get out of this, precarious situation. So this is the beauty of the knowledge of the scriptures. The scriptures open our eyes. Om Ajnana Timirandhasya. Right now, our eyes are totally blinded, to just that drop of honey, right? And we are forgetting the situation around us. So I really like this graphic because we tend to forget in this material world, our real situation. We go on, with our daily lives, different experiences, our day-to-day duties, and we forget, the precarious situation that we are in. But if we study Shastra and we hear Shastras with reflection, we will always be reminded, this constant reminder throughout our scriptures, how precarious this material world is, and how this is not our real home, and how our real friend, is waiting within our heart, right by us, very close to us, our most intimate friend, the Supreme Lord, in the form of the Super Soul, is waiting for us to turn to him. So the more and more we can have this picture in our minds, the more and more we'll be conscious of our actions, and the more and more we'll be able to prioritize our spiritual progress. Otherwise, we can get so caught up by the taste of the honey that we forget our real condition in this material world. So some of you may have already seen this. Most of the devotees have probably seen this picture, but it is a beautiful picture to keep in mind in this material world, that how the Supreme Lord is just waiting for us. He's there. He has his hands out. We can see in this picture that the Supreme Lord, he has his hands out, reaching out to us. But still, we are ignoring him because we are so caught up in trying to taste the honey, the temporary pleasures in this material world. And Prabhupada, he tells us that, if you're really making progress in this material world, then the symptom will be that we will understand that this taste of this honey is actually our enemy, and one will become detestful of, all the pleasures in the material world. So Prabhupada says in one beautiful lecture, this is on Srimad Bhagavatam 7.9.15, in Mayapur, February 22nd, 1976. So he says, this material world is very, very fearful to the devotees. They are very, very much afraid of. This is the difference. Materialistic persons, they are thinking this world is very pleasing. We are enjoying, eat, drink, be merry and enjoy. But the devotees, they think it is very, very fearful. How soon shall we get out of it? My Guru Maharaj used to say, this material world is not fit for living for any gentleman. He used to say, no gentleman can live here. So these things are not understood by the non-devotees, how much pinching this material world is. Dukkhalayam. Krishna says it is dukkhalayam ashashvatam. Bhagavad Gita 18:15. That is the difference between the devotee and the non-devotee. The dukkhalayam, they are trying to adjust how to make it sukhalayam. That is not possible. So unless one becomes detestful of this material world, it is to be understood that he has not yet entered in the spiritual understanding. It's a very, very important thing that Prabhupada is saying. He's saying, unless one becomes detestful of this material world, it is to be understood that he has not entered in the spiritual understanding. So how do we know that we are progressing in this material world? Right? How are we progressing on the spiritual path, right? That we are entering the spiritual understanding. We can judge. Prabhupada is giving us the criteria, right? That one of the symptoms is that we become detestful of this material world because we realize its true dangerous nature, right? That it's temporary, it's full of miseries, and no matter how hard we try, we will never find what is actually required by the spirit soul. So this is how we can evaluate our progress. This is one of the symptoms. And then Prabhupada quotes this beautiful verse from Srimad Bhagavatam 11:2-42. He says, Bhakti pareshan anubhava viraktir anyatra sayat. So this is the test of bhakti. If one has entered the domain of devotional service, this material world will not at all be tasteful for him. Virakti, no more. Are nare bapa. The Jagai Madhai, too much materialistic, woman hunters, drunkard, meat eaters. So these things have now become common affairs. But it is very, very fearful for the devotees. Therefore we say, no intoxication, no illicit sex, no meat eating. It is very, very fearful. But they do not know. Mudha, na bijanati. They do not know it. They indulge it. The whole material world is going on this platform. He does not know that he is creating very, very fearful situation by indulging in these sinful activities. And then Prabhupada concludes this talk. He says, so to get out of these habits, it requires tapasya. This is called advancement of spiritual life, tapasya. The first thing is tapasya, voluntary rejecting the so-called comfortable situation of this material world. So Prabhupada is reminding us, very, very strongly, that how this material world is so fearful for the devotee, that ultimately the nature of the material world is so dangerous. And the more and more we engage in bhakti, right? So the symptom should be that we become more and more aware of the danger of this material world, and we stop trying to enjoy separately from the Lord. And so even when we come to Krishna consciousness, we have to be careful when we are executing devotional service, because the same tendency can come into also our spiritual practice. So there is, gross enjoyment, and there's also subtle enjoyment, the enjoyment for puja, la, pradishta, profit, distinction, and adoration. Because why do these desires come up? Because we still are not realizing the true nature of this material world. If we really realize, the nature of this world, then we will not try and, gain prominence, whether it is spiritual or whether it's material. We will stop trying for that. And then we will engage with humility in the real nature of devotional service, to please our spiritual master and to please Krishna, and not to gain some prominence even within, the spiritual society of devotees. So we always have to be careful of this tendency, because even though we may give up, the so-called gross, tendency of enjoying, grossly sensual pleasures, but then there are also subtle sensual pleasures which we can become afflicted by. And these things are so deep rooted, envy and pride and, wanting to be prominent even within a spiritual society. So these things have to be very, very carefully, purified by understanding the real nature of, the material world, and how even if we become prominent in this material world, what's the point? Because ultimately we can't stay here. We can't hold on to anything material in this world. And by trying to chase, whether it's gross pleasures or subtle pleasures, we will become forgetful of the real purpose of our life. So that's why we have to constantly take shelter of our scriptures and the association of the devotees and our devotional practices, especially, attentively chanting the holy names of the Lord. So these are, practices that will, burn these tendencies to enjoy in this material world. And the more and more attentive we are to these practices, and the more and more we are prayerful, right? We reflect on the teachings, and we pray to the Supreme Lord to help us, because on our own, we are helpless in this material world. Narottam Das Thakur sings, he said, "Porechi bhavat tufane nahi kanishtar." Right? So there's no hope. So what is the hope? Sri Charana Tarini Dane. So the lotus feet of the Supreme Lord, right, are our only hope in this material world. Right? And the Lord manifests in different ways. Like it's explained in the previous purports, how the Lord manifests externally, right? Internally as the Paramatma, and as externally as our spiritual master, who gives us instructions, to lead our lives in the proper way, so that we can realize our true nature and our true relationship with the Supreme Lord, and become free from this entanglement of, birth, death, old age, disease, different types of miseries, adi bhautik, adi devik, adhyatmik, so many different types of, sufferings are there. And even if we are not suffering, so many people around us are suffering. So we can realize that this material world, it's not, like as Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur says, that it is not a place for a gentleman. And our real home, our original home, is the spiritual world. And our real friend is the Supreme Lord. Right? And this is what we should be aspiring for, and praying for, and continuing our devotion practices with this endeavor, and with this intent, so that we can realize our relationship with the Supreme Lord, and we can please the Supreme Lord and be with the Supreme Lord always. So thank you all very much for patiently listening. If you have any questions or realizations you would like to share, I think we have 10 minutes.
Thanks a lot, Prabhuji, for a wonderful class. Like again and again, like you keep reminding us how this is not a place for us to stay, and also like with the graphical picture of a man hanging from a fragile branch of a tree. So like how you explain that like two rats are like day and night, and elephant represents the karma, and snakes are fruity, our fruity results waiting for us to fall down, and little bit of honey like falling in the mouth, where like we feel like a lot of happiness is giving and we keep hanging, and whereas the Lord is giving the hand to rescue us, but still like we are not turning. And you mentioned like this is like this kind of so-called happiness is our enemy, as Prabhupada said. And so this is how we are blinded by the so-called happiness. So to come out of that, like you mentioned that with the knowledge of Shastras and instruction of gurus, like we can see all the things that are around us and then turn towards the Lord who is waiting for us to turn towards him. And also like you mentioned that what I mean difference between the devotees and non-devotees, where like devotees think that this material world is very fearsome, whereas non-devotees think that this material world is very pleasing. And also you mentioned that whatever so-called advancements of this material world, like improving the like any like technologies or keep innovations, keep innovating and upgrading the things, all these are for the material enjoyment, and these are temporary and illusory. And also you mentioned in the 216 how I mean Bhagavad Gita, that which is real cannot change, and which is illusory, that is not permanent. So you keep reminding a lot of times like how we are not meant for we are not this metal is not meant for living for the living beings. Also like you mentioned the quote from Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur saying this world is not for the gentleman to live. And also you mentioned that like how we are like how do we know that like we are progressing in bhakti. You mentioned that we become more and the more we progress in bhakti, we become more and more distasteful of this material world. And also you also cautioned us as devotees that we might refrain from the gross enjoyment, but like still like puja labha pratishtha can enter in our spiritual life, which are subtle, but we should be very careful in this also. And he also like very nicely mentioned that even though we become prominent in this metal world, what is the point, as we cannot stay here permanently. And also you mentioned that like how to come out of all these things, like you mentioned that we should become more and more attentive to our daily sadhana, and we should do it in the prayerful mode. Also you mentioned the quote by Narottam Das Thakur that like Lord's lotus feet is the only hope for all of us. And how the Lord manifests like is Paramatma internally, and is the Guru externally. And at the end you ended the class with like our real home is spiritual home, spiritual world, and our real friend is Supreme Lord. And we should with the more attentive, with the more sadhana, like we should try to reach that goal. It was very nice. I mean, nice project. Very like I mean, I see that like every statement you keep remind us this is not a home for us, and this not like don't think that this is the permanent home for us. Like you have mentioned, like Dukkalayam Asasvitam and also Anithyam Asukham quotes from the Srimad Bhagavad Gita. And devotees lines are also unmuted. Devotees can unmute and ask any questions or any comments. Hare Krishna devotees, any questions? Hare Krishna Prabhuji, like I have one question. So
Yes.
like even though like we are still practicing sadhana these things, so still like to maintain the social relations. So whether it is in the office or in the like family relations. So we might need to attend their functions and those kind of things. Also, like when we take our kids there, like it's kind of a diversion completely, because they see the whatever we are practicing and it is the exactly opposite other side. So it's kind of a diversion for the kids and they start asking a lot of questions. So here, like how to maintain those, like even from the office also, like they say in the name of team building, then like we have to go somewhere like where all this like wine or this madhyam and meat eating, where which are prominent, like which are completely in the premises are completely mode of ignorance. So still like how to I mean what to do at that kind of circumstances, Praveen. Even in the family functions these days, at least our side, we see that like if any function, whether it is the like even marriage also, even some puja time also, like they it became normal in our Andhra that like they keep giving the like full of meat. So it's
Yes.
kind of a prestige they are taking it. So if somebody serves like only veg food, they think okay, these people are not rich or like that. So and it's like for us, like we experienced all those things and we are aware, but for kids like it's a new thing. So how to like ensure that like they are not like diverted, or they are not, they will not become indulged in those kind of things.
So um, for us, sometimes we have to, you know, whether, you know, it's in the office, sometimes you have to attend, you know, different events, uh, you know, so-called team building events, or some training, or, you know, some annual function of the company. Um, so we do that, you know, but we are always conscious that, you know, that ultimately we are not here to enjoy in these events. You know, we do it more out of duty. So, um, so we should always be cautious that whenever we go to these events, whether we are going to the events, you know, at office, or, you know, different, you know, functions of celebration within, you know, the family, you know. So where, you know, there is a materialistic environment, you know, where you have meat and wine. And so when we go to these places, um, internally, you know, we go with that intent more as a duty, you know, and not, you know, go there to enjoy and to eat, and, you know, or to even, like, you know, have vegetarian food and enjoy that food there, because ultimately uh, that is not good for us, right? And it's not going to help us, but we go there socially. uh, so what we do with our children, you know, when we have to go to these places, usually we feed them before, you know, nice things before, you know, taking them to these functions, so that if they are full and they've had, you know, something tasteful, then they don't seek those things outside, you know. And if they go, then you know, they may have, we also carry sometimes some, you know, things for them, so they can eat there, or you know, can I just have some fruits or some sweet or something, you know, which is not, you know, does not have any onion or garlic or anything. So, and so we limit these activities, you know, to, you know, and whenever we go to these activities, we don't go with a, you know, mentality to enjoy over there, you know. And we you know, and for our children, basically we feed them nicely, and we carry some good options, attractive options for them, uh, you know, if none are available over there, so that they don't feel deprived, you know. So the children should not feel that, you know, they're always deprived, but they always have better options, you know. So I've seen in my experience with, you know, with our children, my daughter and son, that uh, when we feed them and we, you know, carry, you know, attractive options for them, like, you know, like if they're going to a birthday party sometimes, and if there's, you know, a cake with egg in it, so we carry, you know, say a small cupcake or something, so that when those kids are eating, you know, a cake full of egg or something, then our children also, you know, they're eating cake, but they're eating, you know, prasadam. So they don't feel deprived, you know, and they have some sweets, and they have potato chips or something that we make at home. So they also have a good time, and after some time, actually, I've seen that people respect, uh, they respect our choices. It's not, initially they do make fun, and but if you stick to your principles, then ultimately actually people appreciate. And and I think the main thing is that we also stay respectful towards those other people, you know uh, and then they become respectful towards our own choices. So it's not that we go with the tendency that you guys are materialistic and we are better, and we know we have real knowledge. So we shouldn't give that impression to other people, although internally, yes, we are more fortunate to have this guidance of the Shastra, and this this inclination for spiritual progress. But it should not come out as something as it should not come out as pride. We stay respectful towards others, and we stick to our choices, and we attend these events, and we attend whether family functions or at the office, more out of duty, and not with the and we have to balance that. We cannot completely avoid these situations. If we think we will be able to completely avoid, no, it's not possible in today's world. I mean, it's totally so contrary to our spiritual culture. So wherever you go, whether it's some family celebration or company celebration or any celebration, things are not very favorable for the devotees. But we have to be tolerant, and we have to attend sometimes these events as a duty, and not with the intent of enjoying. I hope that is helpful for you, Prabhu.
Yes, Prabhuji. Thank you, Prabhuji.
Yeah.
And just to add on to that, so like sometimes they say, I mean, ideally, like restaurants or this resorts, they will not allow the outside food. So in that case, like, I mean, is it okay to take the curd rice without onion garlic, or like because of it is made with in the mode of ignorance, so we should avoid that also.
Yeah. So when we are alone, whenever I went to some company functions, or and have to eat there, just to not to look very odd, right? So you have things that don't really taste that great, like have salad, with salt and pepper. And in America, I remember when I used to go, there used to be, even the dressing used to have some ingredient, I don't know, like it. So I never took a chance. I would just have just like a baked potato and some salad with just salt and pepper. And so it is more like an austerity, it's not like enjoyment. But sometimes when we have to take our children, I think that at least I tend to be a little more, you could say, liberal with the children, that yes, some curd rice or whatever, which has no onion or garlic, even though it's made in the mode of ignorance. But sometimes for the children, it's very practically impossible to avoid, So, so we are a little strict with personally ourselves, but maybe you're a little liberal with the children. And as they grow up, and they themselves can then choose to become strict with themselves. So that's I would say that is my approach. Which I don't know if
Thank
any
you.
other devotees may have some better suggestions.
Thank you, Prabhuji, for the practical tips. Any other devotees have any questions? Or okay, Prabhuji, I think all devotees are like very clear. Prashant Prabhu, you want to say something?
Nothing, Prabhu. Hare Krishna, Nitai, Prabhu. Hare
Hare
Krishna, Danat
Krishna.
Pranam.
Yes, Dhanavad,
Thank you very
Prabhuji.
much for your association. We are missing you, Prabhu.
Same here, Prabhuji. So
Please come, Bangalore.
yes, Prabhu. I plan to come in the coming year. So I hope to see you there. Yes.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Okay, bro. I think so. There are no more questions, so we can end the class here with the Vaishnava Pranama. Vancha kalpataru.
Panchakalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhu bhayevacha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha.
Ananda Vaishnava.
Guru Vaishnava Vrinda ki jai, Shri Prabhupada ki jai, Shri Guru Maharaj ki jai.
Thank you, Prabhu, once again.
Thank you all very much. Yes, Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thanks all devotees. Now ending the class. Hare Krishna. Then was